Today we're talking about vibe coding, what it looks like in course design, and why it matters for everyday teaching. Welcome to Speaking of Higher Ed. I'm Andrew Everett, and this is episode 38. In today's episode, I'm joined by my colleagues Arthur Takahashi and Jeff Mastromonaco. This episode includes an activity designed to help you reflect on our discussion. You can request this free activity online at augusta.edu/innovation/SOHE. As the use of generative AI continues to grow, we too are looking at how it may help us develop course elements and activities. So in this episode, we will share the approach we've used, which some call vibe coding. A quick note about this episode, we will be showing demonstrations of how we've used this approach, and we encourage audio listeners to find the video version of this podcast on Spotify or on the Augusta University YouTube channel. Before we get to that, Jeff, tell us, what does vibe coding mean to you?
Vibe coding was a term that was coined by Andre Karpathy. And the Collins Dictionary definition is the use of artificial intelligence prompted by natural language to assist in the writing of computer code. So essentially, vibe coding is coding by conversation, and telling AI what you want and trusting it to build it.
Arthur, talk about how vibe coding fits into the context of the work we do.
Yes, so in our context, we're talking about instructional design, course design, helping faculty create instructional materials for their courses. So that's exactly what we're doing. We're using vibe coding to code interactive instructional materials for our courses and also for our faculty clients as well for their courses. And one interesting thing here that I should say, the reason why we're using Collins Dictionary definition of the word vibe coding is because Collins Dictionary last year named vibe coding as the word of the year. Right? So we thought that this was an interesting fact there as well. And here I'd like to show just a quick example of something that we're going to be showcasing in the second part of our episode today. But this is one of the interactive activities. It's an interactive simulation here that we created for one of our faculty members. As you can see here, it is digital interactive, putting an initial reflection there, starting questions, going through that. But this is just something that we're going to show later in this episode.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. We look forward to seeing that demonstration. So again, this is a visual episode, so we encourage you to watch the video version of this podcast. Now that we've defined vibe coding and seen an example of an outcome from what we do with course design, let's go deeper. So we're going to do something a little different. We're going to invite in ChatGPT to help moderate this discussion by asking us questions, and we'll see where this goes. We do want to note that this is inside of a ChatGPT project, so we have given it instructions to keep it focused on vibe coding for our context of course design. I've already entered the prompt to get us started, which reads, moderate this roundtable discussion and ask the first question. Here we go. All right, our first question. When you are using AI to quickly build interactive elements in Brightspace, have you ever worried that forgetting the code exists could create accessibility or reliability problems later on? Before we answer that, I do want to preface this with the context of Brightspace. At Augusta University, we do use the LMS D2L Brightspace. So what are we thinking?
I'll start by saying that in my context, in the way that I have been using generative AI for vibe coding, my background is in graphic and multimedia design, but also in web and app development. So have a good, healthy knowledge of coding as it is. And so my use of generative AI is to rapidly develop and cut down what would take me coding probably weeks. You can turn it into days. But having said that, I always have the code in mind. And so for me, like anything else, whenever we use generative AI, the content that we get from it needs to be vetted. So I am, either double checking to see that the code is right, or sometimes having to go in myself and make some edits to get the result that I want. So for me, that's always in the back of my head. But I would say to somebody who maybe does not have a coding background or is using vibe coding for that reason because they've been scared of that type of thing, and this kind of evens the playing field for them, should always vet everything that you're getting out of a GPT to make sure that it's accurate and that you're getting the result that you want.
Yeah, just like any other digital element we create for our courses, we should check it for reliability and accessibility and have that in mind before we even get started. So I think if you go into that with what you already know to do when you're creating content, you're fine. And of course, testing, iterating, and having other people test.
Yeah, and one thing that I do as well, whenever I create any kind of simulation or interactive instructional material, I'm always asking ChatGPT, actually prompting it to take a look at the code, analyze the code, and sometimes I even add like your life depends on it. There's some research that shows that if you pressure ChatGPT that way, it will produce better results. But then asking it, analyze this code and make it accessible, identify accessibility issues. And we use the standard WCAG, WCAG, WCAG 2.2 AA, right? So that's what I tell ChatGPT, like take a look at this code, assess it for accessibility, list the issues, and then fix it as well, and give me the new code. So I'm always prompting ChatGPT to do that before I use any kind of simulation. And as both of you have mentioned already, also checking after the fact, right? Testing it, making sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do.
And just another note on accessibility, just like any other accessibility program out there, ChatGPT cannot verify 100% that everything it's creating is accessible. You still have to, as the creator, check for alt text and other elements, transcripts and captions if you're using videos and whatnot.
Yeah, and that's actually a good point, Andrew, because one of the things that I've seen that ChatGPT has a really hard time doing, and I say ChatGPT because that's a tool that I use to vibe code, but it is not good at all, and I should say it's actually pretty bad at color contrast. And when I say color contrast, what I mean is the difference between, or the contrast between the background color and the color of the text, right? So it needs to be at a certain amount to be accessible. And ChatGPT, in my experience, has not done and does not do a good job at creating accessible color contrast. So this is something that I always find myself using a contrast checker, which you can just go on Google and Google contrast checker and find one online and then check for that kind of accessibility. So from my own experience, this is something that I always do because it doesn't do a good job.
Absolutely. Anything else to mention before we ask for the next question? All right, let's see what we get. All right, second question. What gaps, if any, have you noticed between your existing instructional design knowledge and what AI-assisted building now asks you to pay attention to?
I'll say I think we've always, in everything that we've done, had accessibility and ADA compliance in mind. However, now that we're using these tools, I guess to the points that we've been making before, you really, because we are using these tools that can make errors and things, I think we're probably even more diligent about testing than probably we were even before, simply because the margin of error could actually be bigger because we are using this tool and not relying on our own knowledge and things. So for me, and again, I'm using vibe coding from a layout and interactive perspective that I have some kind of background in already. But I know I'm being a lot more diligent. Again, when we get to the examples, I can show you mine, which we did, have to check contrast and things like that. So I feel like, and probably this is a good thing, is that when you do use tools like this, you're probably even more diligent about making sure that the content is correct.
Mm-hmm. I think I'd say here, this is something that I've been thinking about, and it's not you know, I should say this, the question actually began with me reading some of David Wiley's. For those of you who don't know who David Wiley is, he's one of the leading scholars in the field of open pedagogy and open education. But he poses an interesting question about assessment, right? Are we designing assessments that are reliable and that they actually measure what they're supposed to measure? And I think when it comes to using AI to build our own instructional materials, interactive in the case of vibe coding or not, right? We're also thinking about ways we can assess students in the age of Gen AI. And that's a question that I've been thinking about a lot, right? How can we reliably assess students in this day and age, right? And I don't necessarily have a good answer for that. I think we're all grappling with that question. But in thinking of AI-assisted building of instructional materials, I do think of that gap in knowledge right now. So that applies definitely to me, and I think a lot of us are thinking about that as well.
All right. Let's ask for our next question. What originally motivated you or your colleagues to start experimenting with this kind of AI-supported building in your courses?
I think it started, you mentioned that you've been doing some sort of vibe coding for a little longer than, when we really started playing and
before I knew that it had a term.
Yeah, exactly. Before we knew that there was a term for that. But I think it started probably about a year ago or so. Yeah. I remember reading, I remember where I read about this. Maybe it was from Ethan Mollick, who, again, for those of you who don't know who Ethan Mollick is, he's one of the scholars that has been thinking a lot about use of Gen AI in our courses in higher education. And I think was reading one of his articles, he talked about vibe coding. And that's when I'm like, oh, wow, you can actually do this with Gen AI. And then, brought it up and we started playing, really literally playing with that, creating silly things at first to see the capabilities. And that evolved into the work that we're doing now. That's my recollection, at least.
Yeah, and we've done a lot with it already. Some of the stuff we've done and that we'll show later is already being used in courses as we speak. And then each day we kind of come up with something new to try and push the boundaries of at least what we're learning. And so it's a lot of fun to play with.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate what both of you have said, and that's my recollection too, is that you guys were experimenting on it, and I think you had brought it to us and were showing off one of your examples. And a lot of what we do on top of just trying to stick to good instructional design is to make things more compelling and more interesting and more engaging for the student. And so the designs that you were showing was like, oh, how did you do this, and how long did it take you? And so then to understand that what again would take probably weeks, if not a month or more to develop, in terms of interactivity and look and things like that, maybe took you half that time, if not even quicker. And just with some conversations that you were having with the GPT, really, I think, excited everybody in the office. And so let's start experimenting and everything like that. And fortunately, we're in positions where that's a part of our job. And then I think we all got excited because not only was this beneficial for us, but we saw how it could be beneficial for a faculty member too, because it was then putting these design tools into their hand with maybe a lot lower learning curve than what they would have gotten if they went to something more traditional.
Yeah, very customizable. You can add and remove elements and brainstorm some creative ways to present content.
And Jeff, when you say something more traditional, are you referring to Adobe Captivate, Articulate?
Yeah, I think tools like that. Again, what I guess you would call more traditional development tools that we have been using, and that's not to say that this replaces it, because there are, right now, I think a lot of what we're doing is using it to develop just straight HTML5 designs and things, which is what you would get out of one of those tools too. But I think there's a lot of interactivity that they have in those particular tools that at least we haven't figured out how to duplicate this way. But those tools do come with a little bit of a learning curve, where this, again, is just about having a conversation back and forth and, trying until you get the recipe right. So,
yeah. And I will say, if you Google the term vibe coding, vibe coding goes really deep into stuff that is beyond our understanding without a computer science or developer background. But we're talking about vibe coding in a more narrow sense, very much natural language discussions with the AI tool that you choose to create these interactive elements.
And also also narrow in its purpose, right? Because we're using that specifically to create interactive instructional materials for higher education.
Yeah, exactly. All right, I think we're ready for the next question. For someone who wants to try this, we'll just say in an LMS, not just Brightspace, without a lot of pressure, what is the smallest or safest thing you have seen work well?
Just, short simulations. You can turn a case study into a short simulation where students are, making, they are the decision makers. Whatever your field is, whatever your course teaches, you place them in that decision-making role. And, it can be as easy as or as simple as they just click a few buttons for choices, and you have maybe 2 or 3 questions, and that's it, right? So I think that's and that's how we started, right? With instructional materials, starting with something that simple. Now, you can also create, a graphic, like a short graph, a bar graph, something that is interactive like that, a line graph. So those would also be, simple things that you can try out and make that interactive.
Yeah. And later, when we get to the demonstrations, I'll show using vibe coding for a simple course announcement or an email if your LMS has an HTML editor. And that's also something that you could do to get started and play with and kind of get the feel for this before you start trying to branch out in big builder elements. Anything to add, Jeff?
Well, and I think we saw a little bit of it in the example that Arthur showed earlier in the episode, is that just the design and the look is very compelling. Even if you took out the interactive elements, and that could be a good starting point. Is you just want to make your page be a little more presentable. Also keeping in mind accessibility and things like that. But there are ways, even if you're not talking about making things a little more interactive, just making them look a little more engaging, and that's a simple way to start. Is just having those conversations about, let's just improve the layout a little bit, make it a little more digestible to look at. So
yeah. All right, let's try another one. Have you seen cases where something built this way looked impressive but did not actually support the learning outcomes?
I don't know that we've seen any, because I think at least my experience has been all the things that we've been developing in in our own department and for our clients. But I think that comes with, if we're not getting as instructional designers, and if you're designing a course, AI is not going to, AI is helping us to kind of rapidly develop these things, but it doesn't take the place of all that other knowledge that we need to bring to the table in terms of, how to develop good learning objectives, how to make sure your assessments meet all those and all those rules about good course design. And so those are all things I think that we kept in mind as we were, using a GPT to put these things together. Is okay, yes. And I think even before we started using AI, we always kind of have kept that in mind, because, when we do things like gamification or using multimedia, those are things too that can be looked at as, Are they just impressive things, maybe engaging things, but are they meeting the learning objective? And the learning's not happening, then you really kind of wasted your time. So I feel like we've always kind of kept that in mind. But that is a very good point, and something that you need to always keep in mind is maybe you are creating these engaging pieces, but are they meeting the learning objectives? Are at the end of it, are you able to point to what the student has taken away from it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to what Jeff said. I guess except for, I mean, this is true for video production, Andrew, which is our field, our background. But it's the same idea of like making sure that the multimedia element that we're designing supports the learning objectives. And so I haven't seen examples of that because the examples that we've seen are the ones that we've developed. I will say that at the beginning when we were playing with this, we were just creating like silly things just to figure out what this tool could do. So obviously those would be examples, I guess, of not because we didn't have really any specific learning outcomes other than we're just playing with this to figure things out, right?
Yeah, you could create a lot of things that aren't necessarily attached to a learning outcome just for the fun of it. And that's a great way to get started. All right, let's try our next question. When you look back at attempts that did not go as planned, what pitfalls stand out as the most important for faculty to watch for?
Well, I will say, when and I think Arthur alluded to this some too, and we've been really talking about accessibility, which is really, I can't stress how important that is, especially when you're building materials like this that are going to be online. Important is making sure that the layout and everything is as you want it to be, and make sure that ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever it is that you're using hasn't changed the content, because you, as a faculty member, are the content expert. But I think also really do your due diligence in verifying that it has made accessible modules and accessible interactivity and things. I think early on there was a few instances where there was a request for things like drag and drop and some other kind of interactive elements from the faculty member that the GPT swears it had created in such a way that made it accessible. And in the testing, we found out that it wasn't, and had to kind of go back and change things. So that I think that's going to be probably the buzzword of the episode is test, and make sure that you vet all the content and all the interactivity and everything that you are getting from a GPT.
Yeah. So I would say, in addition to accessibility, Jeff pointed out something important, which is, ChatGPT, again, that's the tool that I use to vibe code, has a tendency when you ask it for changes to also change the content. So you need to be very specific about, I want just the code to be changed and only the part of the code that does this for me, right? So you need to be specific about that. And when I'm happy with the content, I keep telling it, do not change any of the content, only the code, right? So that's an important thing. Another thing too is a mistake that I made earlier on was to not save the versions that I kept generating, the different prototypes. So at the beginning, I would make mistakes like pasting the new code over the old code, and the old code was actually working, but I just needed one extra feature, and now everything has broken down, right? So I think it's very important for faculty starting on this to save the different versions so you can look back, and if something fails, you can just delete that and start from the latest code that you had before things went downhill. So I think that's another important pitfall that faculty should be aware of. And I will say another one, and this is an important one, we haven't touched on this yet, but context window. Right, so something that I've noticed, and maybe we should explain a little bit what context window is. The way I think of that is it's analogous to our working memory, right? We can only take in so much at a time, right? With these tools, ChatGPT and other large language models, they work in similar ways. So that's, that would be analogous to context window. They can only take so much information at any given time. Once we overload it with information, they start forgetting the earlier things in that conversation. So that's usually when our codes start really going downhill from there. When that happens, what I usually do is I just get the last code that worked, right? And I create a new chat, paste that code in that new chat, and ask ChatGPT to analyze it, say done when done, and only that, don't do anything else. And then I create this new working memory, this new context window where ChatGPT knows exactly where we are in that conversation. And then from there, I start asking it again to make changes. So this idea of context window is very important. That's how I deal with that. But I understand, Andrew, that you have a different way of managing this context window, this issue with, what I'm making this analogy here of the working memory of these large language models.
Yeah, one approach you can use is to have it create a summary after it does an output. And that summary kind of looks back at the original vision for what you're doing and what it's done and kind of what you might need to do next. Just so it's kind of looking back over the code and or over the entire conversation and keeping up with the focus. And so it seems to perform better that way when you're always making it look back instead of just keep talking to it, because you get into a rhythm where you're just talking and then saying, add this, delete this, change this feature. So I find that that's helpful to ask it to summarize the vision each time, what it has done and what should be left to do. So you could try that. And of course, again, trying to add it to move it over to a new chat, which sometimes that's the only option.
Yeah, but just, different ways to solve the same issue, I guess.
Well, yeah. And I'll to circle back to Arthur's original suggestion about making copies and things. I think I made the same mistake where, there maybe I identified a bug or something that I wanted a little better, and in redoing the code, that got fixed, but something else popped up. And so I think I learned early on to simply just copy and paste into a Word document and always have kind of some working versions. And so, although they will start to pile up and everything, that kind of made it easy to go back to earlier versions. And, like we've been saying, after a while, those same, issues will keep cropping up because it kind of starts to that working memory kind of starts to bog down. So getting into that, it's very similar to whenever you're doing any kind of work, always just constantly saving.
Yeah.
Conceptually, this is the same thing. So just kind of always being diligent about making copies of working versions that you were happy with. Mm-hmm. So,
and I think another thing that I'm going to add to this, when we started vibe coding, I believe it was with ChatGPT, the version 4.0, I think it was. And I don't know if y'all remember, but with that version of ChatGPT, they had different models and a description of what each model was good for. Mm-hmm. I think it was like 03 or something like that was good for coding, but there was one that was good for casual conversation.
And it was Gemini has the same thing.
Yeah, it was kind of very complicated for you to identify, I guess, which one you should use at a project. The newer version now, or the newest version, I should say, of ChatGPT 5.2, it basically has thinking or extended thinking. And I think that's another important thing for faculty to understand, something that I didn't understand at first. But these models, if you give the models more time to think, they tend to produce better results. So it's kind of like human beings, right? If you are to solve a problem and you just have more time to solve it, chances are you're going to produce better results if you have more time, right? So what I have found is that when I'm vibe coding, if I run into issues, if I'm just using the auto, like letting basically ChatGPT decide using between thinking or extended thinking, and I get stuck, if I actually manually change to extended thinking, I get better results. So that helps me get I guess, unstuck, right? Mm-hmm. But that's something that I would, definitely, tell faculty about, that extended thinking can help them get better results.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I think maybe one more question. How do you personally decide whether an interactive element built this way is worth keeping in a course long term? That kind of points back to the learning objectives in part. Does it align with the objectives? And some content is evergreen. It can live for a while. Some things just don't really change. They're just facts. But sometimes you do need to change some elements or some details. And that's kind of the beauty of this, is that you can just go into the code and change it yourself, change the text or update a link, or you can just take that code back into your AI and describe to it what you want to change.
And I think, in this you can do in conjunction with a faculty member that you're working with or whatever is get student feedback. Because again, you may be meeting the learning objectives with what you've developed, but it's not as engaging as you think. I think we could all probably point to interactive elements that we've created that we thought were, oh, this is really great, or this is super cool, or the students are going to love this, and then the feedback that we get is it's not as compelling as for them as it is for us. In gamification, we'd call that self-hugging. Going with something that we find that's interesting and not keeping in mind who's going to be using it. And so I think just testing everything that to reiterate that word again, and then getting as much feedback as you can, which again goes back to those are things that AI cannot replace. I think everybody has this low level fear that they're going to be replaced at some level in their work by AI, but all those instances of having creative brainstorming sessions and being able to get feedback and things like that you get from all your colleagues, those are elements that can't be generated by a GPT. And so those are some things to keep in mind. I think when you have an interactive element is, go back and look at the feedback and see if it is really doing what you want it to do.
Yeah, in addition to the idea that there should be alignment there with the learning objectives. So obviously, if your learning objectives change, then you should be changing your interactive instructional material. But also, is it producing the result that you intended, right? And so one example here that I can give you is for our Introduction to American Government course. So we created simulations there for students, but specifically for them to go through that simulation as decision makers and then discuss their decisions, right, during that simulation. Well, can we see in their discussion instances of learning? Are they actually learning the concepts, the ideas that we want them to learn for that particular module, right? And if the answer is yes, then we should keep that instructional material in place, that simulation in place. Now, if the result is not what we intended and we don't see those instances of learning in their discussions, right? If it's not adding depth, then maybe we should rethink that simulation. So again, the idea would be, in this case, tied to assessment, but also going back to the alignment with the learning outcomes.
Yeah. All right. Anything else to add before we take a quick break?
No.
So,
all right. Well, we'll take a quick break. When we come back, we will show you some demonstrations of how we've used vibe coding. So please stick around and go ahead and switch over to watching us on video if you're not already.
Got a teaching idea worth sharing? Share it on AU Teaching Commons. We are Augusta University's first peer-reviewed hub of open teaching resources by faculty for faculty. Share your knowledge, help your peers, impact students. Visit us at guides.augusta.edu/AU Teaching Commons.
Welcome back. As promised, we're going to show you some demonstrations of how we've used ChatGPT and, for Jeff, Gemini to vibe code some interactive elements. Again, this is a visual episode, so please take a look at the video on Spotify or the Augusta University YouTube channel. Jeff, what have you done so far?
So we were working with a faculty member who's teaching a communication course that had a section on misinformation. So the idea was that we were going to gamify this section. And I wanted to start out by showing the artwork, just because this kind of goes into how we got to where we were when we started working with the GPT. So this is the original artwork that we came up with in-house. And the concept was that the student or the player would be a citizen or a journalist or a PR representative in a dystopian world, this dome. And so we had this artwork that we had already created in order to then go to Gemini is the GPT that I used, and be able to feed it the narrative that we'd already come up with, and also the artwork to kind of give it an idea of what the look was that we wanted. And so, as you can see, these are some of the layouts and color design and everything that it helped us to come up with. And we, again, going back to testing, we had to ensure that the wipe that you see there visually wouldn't be, seizure-inducing to epileptics. And so, we had to go and make sure and test those things as well. But here you can see examples of different interactivity, all that kind of match the storyline. Here, there's a video of a politician, and they have to go through and there's interactive elements where they actually view the metadata and have to make decisions on whether to trust. This is actually in the journalist track, whether to trust the video or whether it could have been a deep fake. Here they are able to go through different headlines and then decide based on those headlines, which one is the most heavily emotionally manipulative, and then they make their choice and they get feedback. And so again, these are designs and elements that, having hand coded them, could have taken months to get done, where in weeks, in some cases, some of these modules were done in days. You're able to kind of go back through and test, and here's a section where they're actually able to pick different red flags of all the things that they see in the video, and then submit it and try to get some feedback. But again, all these were generated based on the conversations that we started. And again, we did have some elements and pieces that we'd come up with in-house in order to get it started. But again, with the color scheme and everything, that was another thing that Arthur had brought up about contrast. We had to go and make sure that the blue that they used on the black and the white and everything, that the contrast levels were up to those high ADA standards. But right now, this is being used in the course, so we are waiting to get that student feedback to see if the interactive elements that we came up with are as engaging as we kind of feel that they are. And I think we do feel like the learning objectives are being met as we design this. But hopefully, we'll be getting some good feedback from the students.
As someone who's come from a background designing for a while, you've been using other programs, Captivate, Articulate, like Storyline. You've used some others over the years as well. How much quicker did this vibe coding help you create this? Or in other words, how long do you think this would have taken if you were using traditional programs? Yeah,
I think if I had been hand coding this, or even using a WYSIWYG like Dreamweaver to do web development, this would have taken probably months to go back and forth and making sure the alignment is right and that the look is right. And I think this probably cut it down to maybe weeks. I think overall at the entire course that or the entire module, which had 3 tracks that we worked on, maybe took a full month. Where before it could have taken months and months, and again, probably would not have gotten the exact result that we wanted using some of those other tools. So,
did you think using vibe coding for this made it easier to make the changes the client was asking for, or even to provide kind of an A or B example, what their change might look like versus what they already have, what you've already created. So you didn't get bogged down in taking a long time to make their changes.
It did, and prototyping and things like that is really made is really streamlined. And again, as we talked about before, making copies of that code, and ensuring that you do have that backup copy, or that you can go back to. Again, if you are able to give the faculty member or whoever you're working with choices, and then decide maybe what works better or what doesn't, you have that backup copy to go to. But I would say, it more than cut time in half. And again, in a day you can decide, okay, let's create a few different versions, and then on your own maybe even decide which one would be better, because you have that rapid development. And it's very easy to start having these conversations with the GPT that you're using, and then be able to just kind of go back and forth, and it'll even give you ideas of its own as you start having these conversations. Well, have you thought about trying this? And so there were a few instances where some of this interactivity we didn't really have in mind about how you would do it, and it would give suggestions on, have you thought about doing this and doing this? And as long as it met the learning objective, these were things that we would try out.
All right. Thanks, Jeff, for sharing that demonstration. Arthur, what did you bring?
Okay, so this is the simulation that I alluded to at the beginning of this episode. So this is actually a simulation that we created for a faculty member. Her name is Colleen Hergott here at Augusta University, and she teaches physical therapy, right? So this is a simulation that we created for one of her courses, and she had, in this case, a very clear idea of what she wanted. So she wanted this simulation, she had the content, so she provided us with basically the entire content for the simulation, down to like the choices that students could make, some that were appropriate, some that were not, and then feedback for each choice that students could make in this simulation as well. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing because it's a very extensive simulation, but I will say because of her, because she had this very clear vision and all the content that she wanted in this simulation, this was very easy on my end to vibe code. Like I basically got her Word document with all the content that she had, put it into ChatGPT, obviously with her permission, and then I asked ChatGPT to create the simulation based on that. And she had clear parameters of what she wanted. You can see here at the top of the simulation that there are wrong attempts so far, so it counts how many wrong attempts students have, and then we'll give them a score at the end of this simulation. And the image that you see right here of this older man was actually generated in ChatGPT as well using DALL-E, right? And what I did here to generate all the images in this simulation was actually throw the content here for the page where that image should be inserted in, and just ask ChatGPT, okay, based on this scenario, give me a prompt to generate an image for this section, right? And so do not give me the image just yet, just the prompt. And then it would spit out this prompt, and then I would massage it, right? Make changes accordingly, and make changes to the style in some cases, and then I would give the prompt back to ChatGPT, and then it would come and generate the image for me. So that's how I generated the images for everything. I didn't write the prompts myself. What I have found is that ChatGPT actually does a better job writing the prompts for me for images, better than I could. And so I just ask it to generate the prompts for me. So in this case here, there's some information that students should know about this particular case, right, to begin with. Then they have to write this initial reflection that will come later in the simulation on the end screen. So they have to have this initial reflection first. And this was actually a request from Colleen. She wanted students to think about this case before engaging with the scenarios here in the simulation. So let me just put reflection test, and then so students need to have something written down here to start with the questions. Then I think there are 11 questions in the simulation, so it was very extensive. The code was very extensive, but here students are invited to choose what they think is the best response. Then they select that, and then they receive feedback once they get the right answer, because it will give them, it will keep telling them like, choose again, right? So it's immediate feedback, and then they click next once they get the right answer, and they move on to the next question, so on and so forth until they go through all 11 questions. And then it gets them to this end screen, and in the end screen they can download a Word document that shows all of the choices that they've made with the feedback and also their initial reflection. And then students can submit that document to Colleen as proof that they've gone through this whole thing, right? So that's how we've set up this specific simulation here for her physical therapy course.
How long do you think it took from the time she reached out to you wanting to do this until you delivered her the finished product?
Yeah, so there was a little bit, not too much, but a little bit of back and forth. And I will say again, like this whole process was very smooth because Colleen really had this clear vision for what she wanted. So we had some back and forth, very few changes. In all, like I'm probably gonna say a couple weeks, if I remember correctly, because this was a few months ago, but I think it was a couple weeks really for us to, put this simulation together. And then she had at least one of her colleagues, if I remember correctly, testing this, and she came back with really good feedback, and I think she's deploying that this semester in her course.
So it's pretty quick to get something from an idea to actually into a course that's customized for your course, specifically for what you're teaching, your learning objectives. That's pretty impressive. And then the beauty of it is she's got the code. She doesn't just have a finished file. She's got the code that she could then take and copy and paste it into an AI and make changes, just telling it to change the color scheme here from blue to red, whatever anything she wants to do later on, she can iterate herself without having to know the code or to even come back to us if she's in a hurry and just needs to make a simple change.
Yeah, I think you made a good point, which is something I was going to say, that some of this functionality already exists in D2L in terms of maybe tools and things. Maybe not exactly this look, but you could achieve this look with tools that already exist in D2L. However, they do come with a learning curve, and while we have a great unit in CII of really great learning information specialists are ready to help faculty with this, something like this allows them to just experiment and take their time and, like you said, on their own terms, kind of see the design that they want. Because they may, if they did engage with the learning information specialist, they would have to keep going back to them if they maybe had changed their mind about what they wanted in terms of interactive elements and things. And so being able to do something like this kind of eliminates that or lessens that learning curve. And again, put some of the creativity back into the hands of the faculty member because they're able to, on their own, just kind of experiment and see what they're happy with.
Absolutely. And anything else to add before we look at another demonstration?
None of mine.
All right. So I'll show you something that I've done before. This is just creating a simple HTML announcement. D2L allows us to use the HTML editor for announcements. It's a little bit limited on the announcements tool, but also for emails. So just you can see there my original prompt, create an HTML course announcement, provide me with the full HTML code for, I made up a course, Intro to Rock Climbing. This will be pasted into D2L Brightspace in the announcement tool. So use very simple, reliable HTML that will display correctly. The tone and visual should fit a rock climbing theme and feel welcoming. Include that we meet on the campus rock wall on Mondays at 10. And also offloaded to it add a brief checklist of what items students should bring and what they should wear for rock climbing. So I don't have to sit here and necessarily type all of that out. So this is actually the second iteration that you see on your screen of what it gave me. The first one was usable as well, but I wanted a little more design, add a little more layout to it, not as plain as what it originally gave me. So again, the second iteration here, all I said was make this more interesting and bold, just kind of not bold as in bolding the text, but go a little bolder with the look. And so for an announcement, it's not a bad thing. I created this within just a matter of a few minutes. And from here, you could keep going and iterating as much as you want and adding and subtracting text and other things. So it's a fun little way to just get started with an announcement or a simple email. Any other ideas to share about our demonstrations before we move on?
I guess the only thing that I will say is that, unlike Jeff, my background is not in web design. Yeah. So my knowledge of coding is very, very little. I mean, I can go in and change colors of things, but I mean, it's really not enough, nearly enough to create something like these simulations. I wouldn't even be able to code something like what you're showing now, Andrew, with this HTML setup here for an announcement, right? I wouldn't be able to do that from scratch. But just by talking to a tool like ChatGPT or Gemini, we are still able to create something like this. So even for faculty out there who have no knowledge of coding, it could be intimidating at first, but I mean, the tool is really doing the work for you, right? So I think that's important for faculty to know.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's move on to our continuing the conversation question. And so for that, we'll turn back to our friend ChatGPT. I've already entered the prompt, ask us the continuing the conversation question. So let's find out what it will be. What is one small experiment with AI-assisted building in Brightspace, or your LMS, that you would encourage listeners to try in their next course iteration to learn without taking big risks? I would just go back to emails and announcements, honestly. That's an easy and fun way to get started, but there are other elements, fun things you can create.
Yeah, and again, I don't think you even have to be intent on creating an activity. If you do just kind of have a page maybe that has a lot of content on it and you want it to just be a little more compelling in terms of its look, or maybe a little easier to read, you can go to the GPT of your choice and just ask it, considering design principles and readability and all those kind of things, how can we make this a little more interesting to look at? And so that, again, is an easy, low stakes thing to do, because you really can't, get it wrong. And again, if you don't like colors or you don't like the look, you can go back and forth and things like that. But you don't have to worry about any kind of interactivity necessarily that might not be meeting learning objectives. You're really just improving the look and the style and the feel maybe of it. And so I think that too is a good kind of low stakes way to kind of get started, which maybe is just kind of a different step than what you were just showing with the email. So,
in addition to what both of you said, and going off of what you said, Jeff, even ask ChatGPT, right? I have this module. Perhaps students are not engaging as much as I wish in this particular module. What are some activities that I could have, asking the tool, right? What are some activities that I could create, something that is interactive using vibe coding for this particular module? Give the tool the topic, and see what ideas it generates. And then make sure you tell it, something that is low risk. and go from there. So that would be my suggestion, I guess.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts? All right. Well, thanks for listening to Speaking of Higher Ed. To extend your listening experience, we invite you to sign up for our Continuing the Conversation activity. This optional resource is designed to help you reflect on each episode and apply ideas in meaningful ways. You can find it, along with all episodes and show resources, on our show page at augusta.edu/innovation/SOHE. And continue the conversation with us at facebook.com/AUGCII. Speaking of Higher Ed is produced by the Center for Instructional Innovation at Augusta University.